I'm Kelly Hennekins. I cover the Americas for the new Corporate Governance Center at Nasdaq, and I'm delighted to have the honor and privilege of opening up and introducing our first session, which is a fireside chat with Maggie Wilderotter. Everyone knows who she is, so I'm a little bit embarrassed to even introduce her, but because I have the opportunity to do so, I will enjoy it. Maggie, as you know, is an expert in the field of board governance, and she's done so much amazing work as former chair, CEO of Frontier Communications. She currently serves as chair of DocuSign and also serves on the public companies boards of Costco, Lyft, Hewlett-Packard Enterprises, and a few others. And it's just a tremendous honor to be able to be part of this conversation. Maggie will be interviewed by Contessa Brewer, who we're also very lucky to have. She's an Emmy Award-winning reporter for CNBC, and they'll be talking about mentorship and leadership. Just, again, really excited, and please help me welcome our speakers.
Let's see
Either
here.
way, you want me to sit over here?
You can have your picture behind you, and I'll have my picture behind me, and then they compare. Do we still look the same as our photos?
You mean that's my high school picture, I think. So,
I got my hair cut.
and the nice thing is Contessa and I had compared notes before our picture, so we wore the same color lipstick. So,
I just wanted to say, Maggie and I, when we were talking backstage a little bit, we both agreed that when you have a fireside chat, sometimes it sparks questions or comments or things that you want to, hi over there, things that you want to add to the conversation. The plan was for me just to talk to Maggie myself, but instead I think what I'd like to do is offer you the opportunity, if something comes up, I'll stop early and ask if there's any questions. And if you have a question or you want to follow up on an idea, just raise your hand and let's get it into the conversation so we can all be part of it. And it's not just between Maggie and me. It's great to have you here.
thank you so much, Contessa.
Because your biography is so amazing and you have so much board experience and leadership experience, can I just ask you to spend a little bit of time explaining how you got there?
Oh my. So I started my career back in the late 70s. So I see all of the movement that we have today, and it's very, it makes me very excited about the future for women in business, because I know when I was moving up in my career, you know, we talk about Sheryl Sandberg and lean in. I was laying on the table back in the 70s and 80s. But I had the privilege to start my career at a tech company in Sacramento, California that was a startup. And it was in two emerging fields. One was called software and data center systems. We kind of call it cloud today. And the other was the cable television industry when it was in its infancy. And I was there for 12 years, started as the accounts receivable supervisor, and I had 14 jobs in those 12 years. And when I left, I was running the US, European, and Canadian operations for the company. I had a founder who was an engineer by background, but he was a really terrific leader and really cared about diversity, not just about experience and thought, but also he had, of the 10 direct reports, 5 of us were women, which was basically unheard of in tech and still is unheard of in tech. So I did get an opportunity, and what I would call a lucky opportunity, and part of what we have to do in our careers is really maximize that return on luck. I went on my first public board when I was 28 years old, because nobody told me I couldn't, and I decided it would be very good for me to get some outside-in perspective. And I also wanted to get to know the CEOs in the cable industry, since they were my customers, and at the time I was running the US operations, and I felt if I knew more CEOs and had better relationships with them, we could get more business for our company. So I picked out 5 CEOs. I was very methodical about it. Said, these are the 5 I really want to meet. Where do they hang out? And there's this organization in Washington, D.C. called the National Cable Television Association. Has 35 board members, all the top CEOs of the cable operators and the programming networks like HBO, Showtime, et cetera. And at the time, there were 2 seats for vendors on that 35-seat board. And the two set-top box manufacturers had both seats, and it was a little bit like a cabal, like they elected each other. There were no women on the board except for one, Kay Koplovitz, for any of you from the media space. She started USA Networks. And I decided, and I was 28 years old at the time, I decided, well, I'm going to go after one of those set-top box board seats. So I ran for the board seat, and I lost. I said, I lost, so now I have to figure out how to win. I'm not one of those people that sort of gives up. Failure to me is just an opportunity to figure out how to get it done. So I got a copy of the bylaws, I read them, and it said that for every $1,000 you pay in dues is one vote. And the set-top box guys paid the highest dues. They paid $25,000 apiece, so they had 50 votes by just voting for each other. So I knew I had to get more than 50. But I didn't want to take any chances the second time around. So I also saw in the bylaws I could collect proxies from vendors. And we had 4,000 vendors to the cable industry. I called 3,500 of them.
Wow.
And I had a campaign. I was going to represent them. I was going to do minutes after each of the meetings. I'd get the CEOs to come walk the floors at the conventions. So I walked in with 3,480 votes. And with a proxy, they didn't have to attend. I could take their votes in. So I got my board seat on the NCTA board, and within 8 months, I had my first public board seat. So that's how I started. I have sat on 36 public company boards in my career and 14 private, in addition to running great companies, both startups and Fortune 500. So I've been very blessed from that perspective.
When you go back, and this issue of mentorship comes up a lot when we're talking about how do we advance our careers. But I've been told it's not just about having a mentor, it's about having a sponsor. So a mentor might be somebody that you can call and say, I've got a problem, can I run this by you? But a sponsor is somebody who's actively thinking about your career and how you can move forward and pushing you to do so. Where do you see the difference? How important is having that sponsor? And you said that the man that you worked for first had diversity in mind. It's interesting to think that a man was the person who might have inspired you to go achieve all that way before you were 30.
Well, I do think there's a lot of labels that we have today on people that can help us. And back again, when I was growing up in my career, we didn't have mentors or sponsors. And the people that ran businesses were men. So I built relationships with a lot of terrific men that could teach me a lot. And I spent time with them, whether it was over a meal or in meetings. But I took time to get to know different men who I admired for what they did and how they did it. They never knew that they were mentoring or sponsoring me. And I really don't think it's good to have people think that they have this accountability to you. I think it is about relationships. And I think people shy away from building a relationship based upon you getting something from them. I think relationships are two-way streets because they can learn as much from you as you can from them. So in my career, I spent my time building relationships. And through those relationships, I had a lot of different people I could talk to based upon certain things that might be going on in my life, whether it was career choices or strategic moves or beneficial things that I could do for the companies I work for or industry changes. And so you get to be situational with a lot of different people, and they get to be situational with you. So you grow and learn the same way they grow and learn. And there are 20 or 30 men today. I can still pick up the phone on a dime and have a conversation with them about something, and they'll give me insights that I wouldn't have thought of. So I think that to me is really what mentorship and sponsorship is. It is really relationships.
Did any of those men that you feel like you could pick up the phone with, did you have to win any of those men over?
Oh yeah, all of them. And I don't think it's a man-woman thing. I think for any successful person, they have an infinite demand chasing a finite resource, which is their time, just like we all have that. And they want to spend time where they get value, just like you want to spend time where you get value. And I think you have to prove yourself that you can deliver some level of value to someone else versus them just spending time because it's the right thing to do.
when you call people over the course of your career, were you very specific in your ask?
No, never. Because I don't think you say, like, hi, how are you? I got this issue I'd like to discuss with you. I think it's, you get to know people for who they are. And just like when you have good friends, you just sort of, you start off again where you end off. And I think as you build those relationships and you spend time not expecting anything from anyone. And I'm a servant leader. I'm a giver in relationships with no expectation of return. And I think when you're authentic like that, when you get to that point, you might be having a discussion. You can say, well, I've been thinking about doing this for my career or my business, or I have these choice points. I'd love to get your ideas on that. Then it's more casual in the conversation. It's conversational versus an ask. So, and I think we all have to know those nuances, and we all know that people respond differently and process information differently. And one of the things I learned in my career was to interact with people based upon how they're comfortable, not how I'm comfortable. And that way you get, and you can bring out the best in people that you interact with.
That's really interesting. I think it is that it might be a challenge for people who don't naturally read other people well, or if making those contacts and assessing the situation is not your strength, how do you go about learning it so that it can be an advantage?
Yeah. Well, for me, it was really more of an iterative process. I'm a curious person. I love to get to know people. I like to find out what makes people tick, what gets them excited, what gets them out of bed in the morning, what they're most proud of. And a lot of times, people don't get the chance to really talk about themselves, especially when they're in senior level positions. They have a tendency to be talking about business or talking about projects that they work on, but they don't really talk about themselves. And when you can take the time to talk to people about who they are, it means a lot to them. And I know in the field that I grew up in, which is technology, media, telecom, there's a lot of people in that arena that are shy. They're not outgoing people. They're brilliant in terms of intellectually brilliant, but they're not real connectors to others. So when you can take the time to connect with them, it's special for them. And because of that, they have so much to offer. And I would always like to be around people that could bring, you can kind of bring out the best in them, and they bring out the best in you because of that. And so I also got to know a lot of different types of people in different fields, because I also think when you broaden who your network is, you learn so much more from things that are outside what you do every single day versus what industry or what field you're in every day.
Which is when we're talking about diversity of thought, you're basically saying, let's boil that down to our personal network as well. What makes that important on a corporate board is also important in our own lives.
Absolutely. You think about it, in our lives in corporate America, or even nonprofits, et cetera, if you work in a company, you know who's in charge, right? You know who you work for. And as you maneuver through companies, you take on different roles working with and for different people. But in the boardroom, every person sitting around that board table is a peer. There's no one in charge. It's really kind of an unusual situation because most of us are usually know who has the D. So in the boardroom, it's about collaboration and collective wisdom, which is a very different way of having relationships. So getting to know people and getting to know who they are and what they stand for on a board is really important, because you're not making a decision on their behalf. They have to make their own decisions collectively with you. And it's all fine when companies are doing well. But where the rubber meets the road is when companies get into trouble, right? And we live in a time today where it's just a matter of time when boards are put in situations where it's uncomfortable. And you got to make really tough decisions. And you have to have, we have a general who's here today. You got to know who you want to be in the foxhole with when the bullets start coming. And, who's going to run for the door and who's going to stay on deck with you. And that's one of the things that I take the time when I join a board to really find out who am I going to be around that table with when things don't go well.
And sometimes it's when things are not going well that they make the changes at the board level. They bring in new directors. And so now suddenly you're joining a new board, sometimes in a new industry, while the shit is hitting the fan. It's a lot to deal with. How do you establish leadership in that moment when you may be on somewhat of a learning curve about the particular company or industry that you're working in?
Well, I think when I join boards, it's the same way as if I would change a job in my career. It's not something I do haphazardly. I take the time. I meet with every single director. I meet with all of the senior leaders in the company. I want to get a sense for what the culture is of the company, of the board. And I really want to know where the issues are, right? Because all companies have vulnerabilities. And I take a look at sort of the landscape of what could go wrong, not just what can go right. And if a company has more than 3 material issues that they're facing, I have a tendency, depending on what my schedule looks like, to shy away from joining boards in those situations. Because I've been on boards that have gotten into trouble. I've been on boards when we've had like 82 board meetings a year, right? I mean, your life goes on hold. And we all know, too, that operating leadership, right, CEOs and their teams are wildly optimistic about being able to overcome any issue or risk, right? Because you come from the place, I can do it. But I think if you have more than 3, the shit's going to hit the fan somewhere. And you just have to be prepared for that. Now, that's okay for some people who would have the time and that are good at that. I think you just should know and go in with eyes wide open. But in most cases, you have some time on a board to build relationships before you get into trouble. And I believe you build those relationships not the 4 or 5 times a year we're in the room together, but you do it in your off cycle too. I know when I travel, if I'm in different cities where board members are, I go have breakfast, lunch, or dinner with them. I'll spend time with them in a meeting, go grab a cup of coffee. So you have the opportunity to get to know people and to spend time with them. So when things do get more tense, you have a sense for who they are, and they have a sense for who you are.
Over 36 public boards, 14 private boards. A lot of those were boards where you were, I understand, the first woman to join the board. How did you overcome the challenges of being the first woman in the room?
Well, it wasn't just boards. I was always the first woman in the room in the companies I was in too sometimes. But, I think at the end of the day, I would do my homework. I think the most important thing we have to do is be prepared. It gives us confidence individually. So then when I would go in the boardroom, I would go in with knowledge and thoughts and points of view. But I also think that when you interact with other board members and with your leaders of companies, it's about the respect of how you deliver information or ask questions. I didn't make a lot of declaratory statements, but I would ask a lot of questions to get clarity on where people stood on specific issues or what the management team was thinking about or what other board members would think about. And I'm an all-in board member, so I'm an acquired taste. I'm not for every company. There's a lot of companies that don't want really active board members. They'd rather just see you 4 to 5 times a year. That's not who I am. So when I get involved with a company, I am there to help that company wildly succeed. So in getting to know and building relationships at the board level and in those companies, I think that makes a difference to give you credibility to make good value added to those companies. And what board members see when you're the only woman in the room is, well, wow, this is good. She's adding value. Maybe we should have more of that versus just her. And I always weaseled my way on the nominating and governance committee. Every board I would join. And I believe, God made us with 2 hands, one to push ourselves forward, one to yank another woman right behind us. So, and I probably place between 30 and 40 women on boards today. I know there's some recruiters in the room, sorry. I don't get paid for it, but I do it because I get a lot of calls and I want to see more women fill those slots.
Why do you think that's important? I mean, why personally to you is it important that you're turning around then and mentoring or sponsoring or dragging another woman along with you?
Because I believe that we do bring great things to the table. I think that diversity is good business. It helps us make better decisions. It gives companies the opportunity to see different and hear different points of view. And I think that's very important for corporate America. And I've always felt that way. So I do it because it's the right thing to do. I also do it because I feel a responsibility to do it. I'm a woman who has run big companies, run small companies. I've been successful in my career, and I believe giving back is something we should have a responsibility to do, especially because I have a network that's very large that I can open those doors.
Given your experience and the number of people that you've encountered who have either mentored you or given you some piece of advice that you've been able to use, is there anything that you turn around and try to tell the other women that you're mentoring?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think I spent a lot of time with lots of women in different situations, in different organizations and gatherings like this. I actually even do a women corporate director event. I have a luxury boutique in the center of my 80-acre wine vineyard. So you can all come out there and we can drink great wine, eat good food, and also talk about things like boards. But I do an event out there once a year that it's all women. I do a board boot camp for young women that want to join their first board and have never been able to get on one, on what the ins and outs are of not only getting on a board, but how when you're on the board you can be relevant as a board member. And what are to me, the tickets of the dance that you need to know in order to be considered for a board. So I try to kind of weave those into different things that I've done in the past that I would sit down and say, I wish somebody would have told me this instead of me having to learn it, on the fly.
It sounds like the premise for a great girls movie. Go to a vineyard and drink a lot of wine and also learn about business.
Yes.
Can you, but that could be a long time in the making. Could you boil it down for us? And I'm talking about me personally because someone who's here in the room just about maybe a year or two ago suggested to me for the first time considering being on a board, and not just a charitable board, but a business board. And it was the first time anyone, much less a woman that I respected, had done that. Why is that something that we should consider?
You mean joining a board?
Yeah. How does it advance your career? What do you get out of it if you consider becoming part of a board?
Well, I always felt that if you can get different perspectives from different companies on how they make decisions and how they make choices, it will help give you different perspectives of how you make decisions and you make choices. I've looked at every board that I've sat on as a case study. It's a case study in learning about business. And I'll tell you, there are times you learn a lot about what not to do, not just what to do. And I really believe that having that gift of depth and breadth of what companies do and how they do it well and what's that secret sauce to make it work allows you to take that back to the companies that you're involved with. And it gives you capabilities to learn from others and actually leverage that learning.
Can you learn from a board if it's not going well and if you're not getting all of that secret sauce?
Absolutely. Because you can see the signals of how that company got into trouble. And what happens when a company gets into trouble, you can also understand what doesn't work in those situations.
Maggie, do you have to be a CEO to join another board?
Absolutely not. I mean, I wasn't a CEO when I went on my first probably 12, 14 boards. So, and I always say this to my fellow board members too, because a lot of men will say, well, we want to go get a CEO. And if you even just look at the Fortune 1000, right, boards have on average 8 to 12 people on them, right? So if you looked at the Fortune 1000, there are 1,000 CEOs, right? So you're really looking for like 15,000 people. There's only 1,000 of them. And if you're a CEO of a company, you're only going to sit on one board. So you're not going to go sit on multiple boards. So you can't populate boards with just CEOs, no matter who you are or how good you are. So, when you start to say that to people and say there's a pipeline of great people, and I also say to the folks sitting around the table, You're not all CEOs, so why would you expect what you're going to get from a female perspective are all going to be CEOs? There are great women leaders, and what you want are great thinkers. You want great leaders, and you want diverse backgrounds of skills and capabilities that can bring different ideas and thoughts to the table.
When you're on your path to becoming a leader within your career in whatever company that you're working for, how important is it to, as Mika Brzezinski would say, know your own value?
I think it's really important. Our male counterparts have a lot of confidence, I think, as we know, just like they breathe. We have a tendency to constantly second guess ourselves. When we start to build that confidence, then we start to think about all the things that we don't actually do all that great. They don't spend a nanosecond on that. And I've always lived by a great quote from Mark Twain. That he said that if you have ignorance and confidence, success is assured. And I can tell you in my career, I had tons of both. So I think that we can't talk ourselves out of things. I think a lot of times we overthink, and we always look to the downside. We don't look to the upside. And we try to come up with all the reasons why not versus why. So I think if we kind of turn that around, and that's something that I've always tried to coach both men and women that work for me, although, as I said, with the men, it comes a lot more naturally. For the women, we have a tendency to have these discussions with ourselves constantly about what we're good at or what we're not good at. And spend time really celebrating what you're good at. Have that confidence that what you're not good at, you can learn to be good at, just like you've learned already. So the biggest growth experiences I've had in my career is when I've taken the plunge on something that was totally out of my zone, my comfort zone and my experience zone. And I tried something new, and I took on a new responsibility or a new job. That's how you learn. That's how you grow. And you can rely on others to help you in those situations to grow and learn. But, if you make a mistake, course correct fast. That's the other thing. We have a tendency, too, as women, to spend a lot of time trying to fix things, right? Sometimes you just need to move on, including people. In business, we are not paid to fix people. We're paid to deliver results. And we're paid to put the right people in the right seats on the bus. And sometimes that's a painful decision you have to make, but you're not there to change anybody. That's not your life. That's not your responsibility. And I also think the biggest gift you can give to other women is let them make mistakes and let them course correct and move on, or move them into the right positions for them. And I think we've all had jobs that we knew were not our sweet spot. And you power through those to get to where your sweet spot is again, or to decide what your sweet spot is based upon what you do.
Do you still find yourself ever giving yourself an internal pep talk? Don't focus on that. Focus on what you know, what you do. Do you still struggle with those nagging inside voices?
I do to some extent, but I believe that we have to forgive ourselves, give ourselves a break, and I say, come on, Maggie, just get over it, move on. And I think we have to do that. I think we are emotional. That's where we come from, and we're passionate about who we are and what we do. But I've learned in business, you turn the page, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you move on. And as I say to women, what's the worst thing that can happen? You go find a job someplace else, right? And sometimes that's the right thing to do too.
And sometimes you have no choice.
Sometimes you have no choice. Sometimes the gift is someone tells you to go do something else.
Yeah, it's amazing how the pieces kind of fall into place, even in the moment if you can't see it. But if you give a little runway, that you can see, oh, this is how this all worked out, and this is what I learned from it, and I needed to learn that so that I could get here.
Yep. And you as senior women, I would say your biggest gift to the women that you work with and for, or work for you, is give them the truth. Tell the truth to each other. And support each other. That's the other thing that I really took a lot of pride in my career, is making sure that when there, especially in the boardroom too, when there are other women in the room, we all have this tendency to say something, and 5 minutes later some guy says it, right? And it's the same thing you said 5 minutes ago. And so I have, a couple standard lines. If it's done to me, I'll say, John, that's really good. I knew it would take you a little while to process what I said. So I'm really glad you got it. Because, humor's the best thing. We have this tendency to go, what? I said that. So I don't even go there. And I also, when I hear a woman say something and then the guy says it 5 minutes later, I'll say, I'm really glad you're building on what Mary said over here. Because she said that 5 minutes ago. Mary, can you talk a little bit more about how you think about that again? I think it'd be good to share it again. So I also think supporting other women in the room is important to do, but to do it in a respectful way, right? It's not to give people receipts, but it's to make sure that you keep raising that level of consciousness with others in the room.
I can use that line. How many of you can use that line? And yeah, I'm taking that back with me. We have just about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to keep my promise and let you all jump into, not all of you, please, but a couple of you, if you wanted to jump in on the conversation.
Don't you think, Contessa, she's doing a great job? Don't you
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, we have two ladies in the back. I know that there's a microphone somewhere, or if you're loud, we might all just be able to hear you. Go ahead. Can you stand up? Thanks. And be loud.
Loud and proud.
Thank you so much for doing this. Can you just go through a challenging moment in the boardroom, and especially one where being a woman might have helped you and how you balanced it?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I've had a number of situations I think where it's challenging in the boardroom. I had a situation with a company where the CEO was accused of sexual harassment, and this is probably 10, 12 years ago. I was the only woman on the board, but I was also very close to the largest shareholder, who was chairman of the board. I had served on the board of directors with the CEO even at another company, so I knew him pretty well. And I basically felt that he needed to go as CEO. It wasn't right, based upon the facts of what was uncovered, that he stay in that position. And so in the boardroom, talking with other board members in executive session, and I was basically the lead director of the company. We had taken the company private. It had been public. We took it private to actually restructure it. And I basically said to the other board members, this is a tough decision that we have to make, but based upon these facts and based upon doing what's right, this is what we really need to do. And then there was a lot of debate and a lot of excuse as to why he should stay versus go. So I said, why don't we all just take a break? And I get, because sometimes you just want to take the temperature down in a room. And I just went to the largest shareholder, and he and I had a bit of a drag out on the break. And I said to him, it's your decision, ultimately, because you own the majority of this company. But I will tell you, this is my last board meeting if we don't make the right decision. Because I also think our integrity is important. And I'm just not going to go along to get along. I think as a board member, every vote counts. And if there are certain things that happen in the boardroom that's not right, I'm not going to just get along and go along. So it kind of, took him a bit by surprise. But we got back in the boardroom, and he said, I've been thinking about this through the break, and I think Maggie's right. This is what we need to do. And so he did stick by me. I brought in a great CEO. We turned the company around. We took it out of bankruptcy. We paid back every single creditor. The only person that lost money was the person that was chairman of the board. He didn't make his money back, but everybody else did. And it was one of those things that I could have gone along. I've sat on 7 boards for this guy in my career. But that didn't matter to me. And it didn't matter to him either. He wanted to hear my real opinion on this, and if he knew that I felt that strongly about it, he took that very much into consideration and made the right decision.
One more. Yes.
So I was on the board of a nonprofit. I'm on the board of a public company. Those situations, I was solicited by the head of the school or the company or the CEO of the company.
It's a great question. I would say of all the boards that I've sat on, I'd say 75% of them I got myself. And I would actually go after to build relationships with those companies. I also have just a personal rule of thumb that I don't stay on a board more than 10 years, a public company board. I really believe after 10 years you should repot. It's good for the company, it's good for you, it's good for independence. And that's not to say I wouldn't leave a board at 8 years or stay to 12. If the company's going through something, I don't think you leave in the middle of it. You wait till things are where they need to be. But because of that, I would always start planning a couple of years in advance as to what board would I replace this board with if I were to do that. And for example, when I made a decision to retire from Frontier, which was a couple of years before I actually did, working with my board, I worked on the East Coast, so a lot of the boards I sat on were on the East Coast. Well, I live on the West Coast, and I wanted to go back and live again full-time on the West Coast, so I pivoted all of my East Coast boards over that 2 to 4 year window, the 2 years before I retired, the 2 years after, to all boards on the West Coast. So today I walk to 3 public company boards. It's really nice when you don't have to jump on a plane and go multiple time zones and multiple days to serve on a board. It gives you more flexibility, and that's been a real gift. I'm on the same time zone with every board, and I have to jump on an airplane for an hour and 15 minutes to one meeting, and that's it. So I do think, so things change over your time as to what gets important in your life. So in my life, if it's not in the San Francisco Bay Area or the West Coast or Dallas, Texas, where my grandbabies are, I don't even consider it. So,
Kelly.
As a what types of advice might you have for non-governance committees for providing for the best board composition they could have?
so did you hear the question about non-governance committees? What's the best advice for getting the best board members on a board that non-gov has to oversee? Well, I would say it's a tough situation because things are changing quite rapidly. But I think definitely diversity. You want to have diversity of thought, background, gender, race. And it also should depend on what your customer base looks like, how your customers make decisions, your stakeholders, whether those your supply chain, whether your employee base. You want to have people that are focused on culture and values in addition to being focused on business. Because I really think that one of the competitive advantages for companies are their people. I think people are the most important asset in any company. I mean, I've worked for tech companies my whole life. It's not the technology, it's the people. And so I think when you start with people and you go from there, it's important. And I also think having board members that really care about the company, that are passionate about their products, about the reason why they exist, those companies exist, that are there to be helpful, but also have a wealth of knowledge that they can bring to the table and perspective that might be different than what the company has needed. One of the challenges, too, is we live in a world that moves so fast. Our companies, you can join a board today, and 5 years from now, the reason why you joined that board is not relevant anymore to that company. So company relevance from a board perspective changes a lot more rapidly than it used to. So refreshment and turnover has to be more rapid than just waiting for someone to decide they don't want to be on the board anymore. So I do think that you should have a term limit or an age limit. I think a number of year limit is another way to look at it. And I found that some of the companies that I'm involved with now, we do say that 10 to 12 year window should be what you expect when you join this board, not to stay longer than that. I also think that looking at the governance of the company and how the company actually operates to do well is important for non-governance committees to do. And I also think that there's a responsibility that when the board's not functioning well, to admit it and to try to figure out how to fix it. And some of that is how we all do, polls every year and do committee evaluations. We do a full board evaluation on the boards that I sit on. And I think not filling out a form is the right thing to do. I think it's more about a conversation, whether it's the general counsel or maybe some external resource that the company would use. But I think nuance matters because no one's in charge. And one of the questions that I sit on several Nom and Gov committees that I really like to ask as a member of that committee, of the board members, is if you were to go start a company tomorrow and you could take 4 board members from this board, who would you take with you? Because what happens is then you start to see the separation of really who are the valuable board members and what are those qualifications for the board, and can we look for more people like that that would be helpful to that company to move forward. So.
We have one more and just about time for one more right over here.
Hi.
So much. This has been really valuable. With Milton Friedman economics kind of going out and boards and companies being much more focused on how environmental and social and governance factors impact their bottom line, a lot of times those conversations start in the boardroom and are financed in the boardroom, and I'm curious how you've initiated those conversations or continued them and given them momentum throughout your career.
So I'm here to tell you, though, Milton Friedman is not gone yet. So, you know, public boards do exist to create shareholder value. It is actually the law. I know we'd all maybe like to change the pivot on how we do that, but today there's case law that actually supports that. And we have SEC law that we actually have to follow from that perspective. So shareholders are a very important constituent. And I look at a lot of the things that we do in governance, whether it's ESG, whether it's diversity, whether it's making sure we do right in our communities with our customers and our employees. Those are all ways that you create shareholder value. I feel there are huge risks to creating shareholder value if you don't do those things right. And I believe in the boardrooms that I'm in, we try to make sure that we're communicating that connection of those other stakeholders and areas that are important for the company to do right and do the right thing, mitigates risk for the company to get into trouble and to reduce shareholder value. So we've started to pivot a lot of our discussions around those stakeholders or ESG toward how it creates value in a company. I'll just give you a good example. I sit on the Costco board. How many of you are Costco shoppers? If you're not, you need to come see me afterwards. We'll have to have another discussion. But we have 240,000 employees at Costco. We're a 44-year-old company. We've delivered an 18% compounded return year over year to our shareholders for the last 18 years. You know, we're a Fortune 10 company. The most important asset in our company are the employees that work there. Our turnover rate, if you take retirements out, our turnover rate at Costco is 4%.
Wow.
In retail, right? We're a warehouse play, but it's still in the retail category. If you look at a typical retailer, turnover is about 50 to 70% annually. If you take out people that have been at Costco for the first 2 years of that number, it drops in half. And if you look at management, at the management level, in any Costco warehouse all the way up to the CEO, it's 1%. So what happens is the cost of turnover is one of the most expensive things you do in any company. You all know that. It's a full-time job just trying to get people up to speed. And then you lose people, and you're doing it all over again. And it's very costly for the company to be able to get things done. And we're a scale business at Costco. So when Craig Jelinek, the CEO, who's been there 35 years, started stocking shelves in a Costco 35 years ago, when he goes exit stage right, that 240,000 people turn stage right in about 3 seconds flat. So it gives you huge power in the marketplace to move fast, to keep it simple, to drive results. Everybody speaks the same language. There's a real goodness to that. And in technology, we've made excuses for years. Oh, we want 15% turnover because that keeps refreshing the population of your employee base. Well, I've seen the other thing. I've seen the other side, and let me tell you, it's a lot better. So it's just an example that if you take great care of employees, they take great care of our members. Our membership renewal rates are in the high 90s every year. We got 90 million members in the United States of America. So then when you get renewal, you get rabid Costco shoppers like all of you that raised your hands. So remember, Rotisserie roasted chickens, $4.99. Hot dog and a Coke, $1.50 for the last 44 years. So I'll end on that note. So.
A success story.
Yes, thank you very much.